Speaker suicide. I just couldn't resist the title on that. Ron in Stowe, Vermont, where Terry and I just were. Oh, what a lovely place. We went on a New England leaf peeping tour, started out at Bangor, Maine, and worked our way down through Vermont and Rhode Island and little bits of Connecticut and Massachusetts, New York. Whew, that's some pretty territory out there. Really neat. Paul, what physics are at play when a clipping power amp, volts, amps, drives a speaker's voice coil? What and why does this destroy a driver? On a similar note, why are tweeters more susceptible to damage? And finally, what are the sound characteristics of losing a tweeter in, let's say, a 3 or 4-way speaker? How would you ever find or notice a bad tweeter in something like the Infinity IRS with dozens of drivers covering the same frequency? Well, lots of questions there. What happens when we put too much power into a driver and we destroy it? Well, typically it fuses. So if you picture how a driver is made, whether it be a woofer or a tweeter, they're all pretty much of the same, similar type of construction. So we have a voice coil and a cone. Let's just take that simplest of examples. And a voice coil is basically a tube of very thin brass or aluminum. I mean, there's copper. There's any number of, real thin. Just picture like the side of a can. Take a can in your mind and whack off its ends. Now we just have this very thin metal tube, and they're 1 inch, 2 inch in diameter. Okay, some are as big as 3 inches, but typically you've got a 1 or 2 inch diameter, very thin piece of metal. And it's varnished so that there is no electrical conductivity on it. And now we're going to take a thin piece of wire and we're going to wind it around that metal, okay? And we're going to glue it on there and then glue that whole mess onto the cone. So what we wind up with is a coil of wire, a very thin wire typically, that becomes a magnet when we apply power to it. And this thin metal thing sits inside of a permanent magnet. It just sits inside it. That's the easiest way to look at it. Now, when I apply power, I make a magnetic field in that coil, which pushes the speaker away from the permanent magnet or pulls it towards the permanent magnet. And in that way, the woofer or the tweeter or the mid-range move in and out, and we pressurize the air and we have sound, right? So if we put too much power into that coil, or we do so for too long of a time, let's say we put DC. Let's say that the amp has a problem and it goes DC, which means it's just putting out positive volts and it's not moving between positive and negative, or you just put too much power in. Well, what'll happen is that voice coil will heat up to the point where it gets so hot that the insulation that's keeping all of that as a separate coil can melt and the voice coil fuses. And then what happens is the speaker will stick, it'll get stuck, and you can push on the speaker and it's like it's just frozen. And that's pretty obvious. A tweeter, they're very delicate relative to a woofer. So a woofer typically is designed to handle hundreds of watts. And a tweeter, not so many, 10, 20 watts. So tweeters are more delicate. They're smaller, they have to move at very high frequencies, so they have much less mass. They have to have very, very fine wire in order so that you don't have a lot of weight, a lot of mass. And that fine wire will die because you're putting too much voltage, too much current, too much heat all at the same time, and it does that same thing and it freezes. And so that's why I think I answered both of your questions there. On the IRS, there's 32 tweeters. And if one of those goes out, I wouldn't know it. Just wouldn't know it. Now, I happen to be a little bit scrupulous, not terribly, but enough that I will go through once a year and I just put my ear up and I listen to make sure every one of the drivers are working, mid-ranges, tweeters, just do a systems check. It's where I unplug everything, reconnect everything, clean up, make sure everything's working right, and then we're good for another year. But it's pretty easy to tell on your own speaker. You won't have any highs. You have any, so just put your ear up to it. It's easy enough. You don't have to have the music playing. You'll hear hiss out of most systems, and that's good. You put your ear up and then down to the mid-range and the woofer. Okay? Hope that answered your question on the speaker suicide. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.